Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So it's another year, and yet again I come across another male inmate in a woman's prison, and the repercussions that come with that. So today's story brings us to Washington State, where we have at least 4 male inmates allowed to serve their time in women's prisons. We have a female inmate who is suing the Washington State Department of Corrections because she was subjected to SA at the hands of a male inmate who supposedly identifies as a woman. And then we have a lawsuit from a male inmate who's suing because this person believes their rights have been infringed upon. So Senator Nancy Mace, who is known for introducing bills that protect women's spaces at the Capitol and in various federal buildings, has also introduced a bill targeting this issue. This bill is designed to protect female inmates from being housed with males. We never thought we would need such a thing in 2025, but sadly we do, and it's becoming a situation that is very dire indeed and needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency.
So my bills were so far would include schools and prisons, but I never want specifically for prisons because the country, we're housing rapists in women's prison facilities and they're raping the women. And so you can't make this up. And this is happening. The left wants to excuse it. They're mentally ill. And we got to make sure we protect women, even in our prison system. They shouldn't be raped by a man just because he says he's a woman.
So we have a female former inmate who was suing a prison in Washington for literally locking her up with a trans-identifying male. So this woman has opted to waive her anonymity. Her name is Mozzy Clark. She said that she was locked in a cell with a 6'4" man who supposedly identifies as a woman, and he was sexually harassing her, asking her to engage in various acts with him, which obviously she declined. But she said one day she woke up and found this person assaulting her. So this male inmate, Chris Williams, was removed from her cell, but he was still housed within the prison, within the female unit. So she still saw this person. She said, "I woke up to our officer pounding on my door, and it scared me." Then she realized that Williams was hulking over her and jerking his hands out of her pants. And she says she froze. So she asked, "What are you doing down there? Why are you sitting there? Get up in your bed." I'm sitting there and she looks at me and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I just couldn't say anything. She wept as she recounted how traumatized she was by the incident and by the failure of prison officials to heed her pleas for help until it was too late. "I don't understand why it had to lead to this. Before you pulled him out of my room, it shouldn't have had to get up to that point." So she repeatedly complained to prison officials, begging them to remove Williams as her roommate. She described how he would come into the shower rooms and stare at her naked body as she bathed, follow her into the bathroom, watch her use the toilet, and jeer to her about how other women in the jail wanted to pay him for sexual favors. So the lawsuit was filed last week in the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington at Tacoma. She said prison officials basically laughed off her concerns. They also actively discouraged her from lodging an official complaint or talking about her victimization, all in furtherance of the prison's policy of housing biological males in the women's prison, the complaint says. So Clark is being represented by David Pivtorak. He tweeted this the other day saying, "Lawsuit alert. My law firm is suing the Washington State Department of Corrections, alleging that our female client was locked in a cage with a biological male predator who SA'd her." Clark is alleging that she suffered extreme and permanent trauma and severe emotional distress, the effects of which she continues to suffer today. Prison officials were well aware that allowing biological males into a female prison creates a substantially increased risk of harm to female prisoners, including intimidation, violence, and SA. Prison officials also knew that allowing biological males into a female prison violates the basic human rights of women, including the right to be safe from risk of increased harm and the right to privacy and dignity, by not being compelled to sleep, shower, or otherwise be naked in the presence of incarcerated men, or exposed to the naked bodies of incarcerated men, and the right to not be compelled, coerced, or pressured into using speech that reflects a belief that conflicts with biological reality. Despite this knowledge, defendants forced Miss Clark to share a cell with a 6'4" biological male who was also known to be a violent, convicted sexual predator. During the time Miss Clark was locked in a cage with this man, he continually talked to her in a sexually explicit manner, touched himself luridly in front of her, threatened plaintiff with sexual violence, and when prison officials did nothing about this behaviour, went on to SA her multiple times. And he said being incarcerated does not mean that you lose your constitutional rights, your right to human dignity and physical safety. That's why the practice of segregating men and women in these correctional institutions has been the practice for, as long as they have been around. Same thing with sports. And like with sports, women were made to undress in front of a man and to see a man undress before their eyes too, without their consent. As we know, this has affected women's spaces across the board, as well as prisons. So he said, because women do have the right to privacy and they do have the right to physical safety, which is impossible when you have men and women together in the same space. This case illustrates what happens when you take this radical gender ideology to its logical conclusion. Not only are you talking about the erasure of women's spaces entirely, but literally offering women up as sacrificial lambs to biological males who are violent predators. This is what they're literally doing. They're giving these predators access to women. Why? There's no logical explanation. There's no logical justification for this. Absolutely none in a civilized society. You can't tell me that the person is allowed to do this because they identify as a woman. How is that a justification? It's not rooted in reality, and it's offering women up to be assaulted. That is barbaric, cruel, and unusual punishment. And we know, again, that these prisons have less security. Women's prisons typically have less security than the men's prisons. And you're putting men who have been convicted of crimes against women and children in these prisons and locking these women up with them. The sexual predator is not going to stop preying on women. We saw that video of that predator who was just being held in a waiting area. He went over to the women's section of the waiting area and assaulted a woman right in front of everybody.
Justin Avery is an accused sexual predator arrested for reportedly assaulting 5 women near ASU's Tempe campus in April. Just days later, while waiting to see a judge, MCSO says this shocking video shows him sneaking past an MCSO deputy before grabbing a woman sleeping on the ground at the processing facility.
What we have here is a failure on the part of the deputies, assigned deputies, to do their job properly using the technology that they have.
The surveillance video appears to show Avery crawl up behind the victim and grope her before pulling down his pants. Court paperwork reveals a woman sitting nearby screamed for him to get off the victim. Video shows him gesturing for her to be quiet. That's when the deputy intervenes.
But for the fact that someone, one of the women said, get off her, he may have gone undetected. And that's clearly a dereliction of duty.
So these deviants are opportunists and you're giving them the access they want. I mean, if this isn't recklessness, if this isn't negligence, I don't know what is. These policies shouldn't even exist in the first place. But even if they do, there is absolutely no safeguarding against them being abused by men who lie to get exactly what they want. So Redux reports that a trans-identified male inmate has launched a human rights lawsuit against Washington Women's Prison after being accused of SA and physically assaulting female inmates. So this male inmate is suing multiple Department of Correction officials after they recommended he be transferred back to a men's prison. Usually after they've gone on to assault various female inmates, that's when they recommend that they go back to the men's prison. Of course, they wait until something happens, rather than acknowledging that it was never a good idea to begin with, to put it lightly. And then they act surprised and say, oh, maybe we should move them back to the men's prison, pretend that they're surprised about it. mean, how could you have possibly not seen this coming? They're locking men up who have actually been convicted of SA and crimes of that nature and locking them up with women. What did they expect to happen? So the lawsuit was filed the day after Christmas. It was obtained by Redux by Noni Lotus Flower. This is a different male inmate because there are about 4 in this prison, and this is one of them. Lotus Flower claims that multiple staff members at the Washington Correctional Center for Women are responsible for violating his 8th Amendment rights against cruel and unusual punishment. Lotus Flower, born Nathan Goninen, is serving a 10-year sentence for the brutal murder of a teen girl. And this is the person who's claiming that his 8th Amendment rights have been violated. They're locking women up with men who have murdered girls, with men who have assaulted women and girls. And they're the ones who are claiming that their rights have been infringed upon. In his complaint, why is it only a 10-year sentence as well? In his complaint, Lotus Flower says that he was placed in solitary confinement for an extended period of time, putting him at risk of self-harm and mental health episodes. He alleges a conspiracy in which multiple WCCW staff members intentionally targeted him for mistreatment in order to make him blow up. So this person was cited in a Prison Rape Elimination Act case, and he claims that the staff falsified evidence such as photos and reports detailing the injuries of female inmates, leading to him being designated a high-risk, maximum security inmate. So he's claiming that there was a conspiracy against him, and his allegation was marked as substantiated after an investigation took place. In addition to the Grape investigation, Redux also found that Lotus Flower had been cited for physically assaulting a female inmate in April 2023. There's CCTV footage that showed Lotus Flower punching a female inmate in the face while both had been out in the recreation yard. Then he allegedly contacted the victim and other inmates, putting pressure on them to provide false testimonies denying or downplaying the assault. He was ultimately found guilty of the violations and was sentenced to a loss of privileges for 120 days. So in July of 2023, the prison made recommendations for Lotus Flower to be returned to the men's prison. So when he was designated maximum security measures, he allegedly threatened members of staff. Can you imagine? This is a women's prison, so more than likely there will be multiple female members of staff. And he said, "I will beat your ass. I will block your effing face out. You are an ugly effing slut." Lotus then also threatened another individual involved in making the decision, loudly declaring that he would end her effing life and murder her family. This doesn't only affect female inmates, it affects the staff members too, many of whom are females. So Lotus Flower contacted the Washington Department of Corrections to complain about being transferred back to the men's prison, and he received a response from Deborah Woodford, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Women's Division. In her response, Woodford noted that Lotus Flower had been an unmitigated threat to the safety of other incarcerated individuals and had also made serious threats of bodily harm towards staff. Woodford states that such overtly threatening and aggressive behaviour is not typical with individuals incarcerated at WCCW. But this is what happens when you put men in women's prisons. Anybody with any sense could have seen this coming, because Lotus Flower knows that being male, more than likely, he's going to have more strength than the female inmates. He's going to have more strength than the female members of staff. And he's basically throwing his weight around, entitled no doubt, because Lotus Flower and people like him have been given the message that they come first, that their desires, no matter how depraved they are, come first. No wonder they're entitled, no wonder they're arrogant and think that they can get away with anything. Those who are responsible for these policies, the Department of Corrections, the state, they have given the message that their wants come before the rights of the women who surround them in these prisons, who they come in contact with. So the lawsuit basically alleges that there's been human rights violations, or even suggesting that this person goes back to the men's prison. This is how they're playing it. They're claiming to be the vulnerable ones, so vulnerable that they can't be in a men's prison. But it's okay to lock up females with male inmates who have been convicted of crimes against women and children. That's okay though. So Lotus Flower was convicted of taking the life of 17-year-old Jessica Franklin. The violent criminal targeted Franklin just hours after being released from prison for another conviction in 2007. She died via strangulation, and her body was found beneath the underpass in Bellington, Washington. And a forensic examination revealed signs that she had been essayed. Lotus Flower was convicted on second-degree manslaughter charges. So Lotus Flower had a successful lawsuit in 2017, citing discrimination on the basis of gender identity and demanding access to gender-affirming surgeries. So it was the ACLU who entered the complaint in 2018, and the suit was ultimately successful. So is it any wonder another suit has been filed? Because Lotus Flower knows that the court system seems to be on his side. So we have multiple male inmates in this women's prison as we speak, including a notorious serial killer named Donna Perry, who was convicted of murdering 3 women in a 4-month time frame in 1990, but claims to have murdered many more. Other male transfers include Brett David Sonia, who was convicted in 2005 and 2006 on dozens of charges related to the sexual exploitation of a young girl. Jolynn Charisma Star, born Joel Thomas Nichols, who was convicted of 2 horrific sex attacks on young girls. I'm just at a loss for words, to be honest, that they think that this is acceptable. Everybody responsible for these policies that have led to these predators and violent criminals being locked up with women, they all need to be held accountable. They all need to be fired. They need locking up, because this is absolutely criminal. It's not like you just lock these women up with men who, were convicted of fraud, who identify as women. Not that that would be acceptable, but they're literally locking women up with men who prey on women, with men who have taken the life of women and girls. How is this justifiable? How is this even considered remotely acceptable? If this doesn't violate the constitutional rights of these women, I don't know what does. I really hope that these women are put in touch with good lawyers and that they sue the heck out of these Department of Corrections. And this can never happen again. And it shouldn't take a woman actually being assaulted for them to move these disgusting degenerates back to the men's prisons. Let them throw their weight around like that in the men's prison and see how far they get. They know that they can get away with it in a women's facility that has less security, where the staff aren't trained to deal with male inmates to the same degree as staff who work in men's prisons. They're not trained. This is what Alicia Beckman confirmed as she quit her position in protest to these ridiculous policies. The staff aren't equipped for this because it's a women's facility.
I think it has just created a lot of risk, a lot of unknown, confusion, frustration, anger. It just has a vibe that doesn't sit right with a lot of us who work at Shakopee, because we are a women's correctional facility.
The policy says that safety is an important factor, kind of reiterates that again and again before allowing a transfer to the prison. But let's just talk about a few of these inmates in Shakopee. There's Bradley Servio. He's a convicted murderer. Sean Windingland and Elijah Berryman, who sexually abused children. They're all around women now. Do you believe it is safe to move these men into an all-women's prison?
I do not, Liz. We house every custody level. So we have what would be considered low-level offenders who are there on DWI charges, theft charges, drug possession. And then you bring in biological males who are violent, who would be housed at custody level 4 facility. And I just believe we're re-victimizing some of these women, re-traumatizing them. You know, they are incarcerated. However, they all have a past, and a lot of their past includes physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. And so I think allowing men to live amongst these women is traumatizing, and it's also unsafe for staff. I don't believe we've been properly trained.
They're equipped to deal with female inmates who are in there for crimes that vary in terms of seriousness. This is sick beyond words, and enough is enough of this. Please write to your local elected officials. If you live in Washington state, if you live in a state that has these policies, write to them and let them know that they're not going to get your vote if they allow this to continue. That women are being assaulted, women's lives are being put in danger. It's only a matter of time before one of these violent thugs take the life of a woman in prison. All it takes is one punch coming from a 6'4" male, for example. So this needs to come to an end. As a matter of urgency, this needs to be addressed. So I'm hoping we see more lawsuits to hold these departments accountable, to hold the people responsible for these policies accountable. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.